Given the unfortunate circumstances between these two families, this definitely sounds like an odd and unlikely pairing. But at one point in the books, this could have actually been a thing. In A Song of Ice and Fire, Cersei's mom Joanna was actually friends with Oberyn's. Once upon a time, Elia, Oberyn, and their mom took a trip to Casterly Rock after the death of Joanna and the birth of Tyrion. Oberyn thinks his mom was planning to marry one of them off because there was an extra cabin on their ship that looked really fancy and meant for a highborn. And his mom later confirms this when she tries to do just that. She offers up Oberyn for Cersei or Elia for Jaime. But Tywin refuses both matches. He wants Cersei to be queen and is saving her to marry Prince Rhaegar. I don't think we get any insight as to why he refused the Elia-Jaime match. I doubt it's because he wanted to marry Jaime to a Tully, because that plotline came up years after this. It could be racism, to be honest, because the Dornish are often seen as outsiders to the rest of Westeros, treated with scorn and prejudice throughout history, probably because they were enemies to the rest of the kingdoms for so long. Which is funny since they marry into the Targaryen family a few times despite that, with Daeron the Good, his sister Daenerys, not the mother of dragons but the one she was named after, who married a Dornish prince. So Oberyn and Elia actually have Targaryen blood, which is why Elia marries Rhaegar later on since Aerys wanted a Valyrian bride for his son. But I digress. Despite these matches, Dornish people are seen as outcasts, so that could be the reason why Tywin refused the match, and why he offered to have Tyrion marry Elia instead of Jaime. He felt insulted, so he offered his own in the form of Tyrion. Since most people in Westeros feel insulted when dwarves are put forward for marriage pacts, Oberyn's mom was no exception. So there was no match between the Lions and the Vipers. But what if there had been? What if Tywin had been willing to part with Cersei and let her marry Oberyn Martell? How would the story change? As usual, when I do these what-ifs, I like to find reasonings within the story that make the changes more reasonable and realistic for the characters. When it comes to Tywin accepting a match with the Martells, it definitely seems like something that is unlikely and kind of out of his character, especially at this point in time. Tywin is an ambitious man who is obsessed with his legacy, and ever since Cersei was a child, he was planning to make her a queen. If Cersei married Oberyn, she wouldn't be a queen, or even a Dornish princess. At least not an important one, I would say. Oberyn is a second son. He's not in line to inherit anything that could really be seen of value to Tywin that would prompt him to go for a marriage pact like he did with Rhaegar and later Robert. So what could shift his mindset and make it believable that he would allow Cersei to marry Oberyn? Well, I think the answer actually lies with his wife, Joanna. Joanna is a pretty important character in my opinion, at least when it comes to Tywin. It's said that she's the only one who actually knew who Tywin was beneath all the armor. She was the only one who could really make him smile, and when she died, it seems the joy died with him. It's even said by Tyrion in the books that when Aerys was king, many thought Tywin was the one who ruled the Seven Kingdoms, but it was Lady Joanna Lannister who ruled Tywin Lannister. So the way I see Tywin accepting the match is through his wife, say by having her live a bit longer in this timeline. Tyrion's birth is just delayed a little bit, and so is Joanna's death. Depending on how much you want to say she meant to Tywin, her presence and input when the Martells arrive could change Tywin's answer. But I'm not going to say it's a one and done kind of deal. It's something that takes place over time with Tywin. Joanna finds little ways to bring it up for months and softens Tywin up to the idea so he'll be more accepting. Now that may sound kind of iffy to believe that Tywin, who is a man notorious for being unyielding, would just give up on his ambitions because his wife asked him to. But I would venture to say that this is a somewhat different Tywin. After all, in the books they make it seem like he took a pretty dark turn after his wife died. But if her influence isn't convincing enough, there are other things I could add. One would be having Cersei rejected as a bride for Rhaegar much earlier on in the story. In canon, Cersei is around 10 when she's offered up to the crown prince. If we're going with a younger Cersei around the time the Martells are looking for matches, she'd be around 7. Let's say for some reason Tywin decides to get a head start on the whole betrothal thing. It makes sense, Rhaegar is about that age people get married off in this world, so why not try to snag him for his daughter while he can as soon as possible. If he pushes for a marriage earlier, then he can be shut down earlier by King Aerys, as the king doesn't believe the Lannisters are worthy of his son. So removing Rhaegar as an option sooner could help out, but I'm sure some of you will question that because even after Tywin got rejected in canon, he still kept Cersei single and available for years, even though she had a lot of marriage proposals thrown thrown at her. In the books, Jaime says that Tywin might have still been holding out for that Targ match, should Elia die in childbirth, or perhaps he wanted her to marry Prince Viserys. If that's the case, another way Tywin could give up on a Targ match could be to play on his fears a bit. His relationship with the Mad King was getting pretty strained at this point, and one of the causes was the fact that Aerys lusted after Tywin's wife, and took unwanted liberties during their wedding night. Joanna could use this against Tywin, saying Cersei being at court could be dangerous to her. As she grows and develops, who's to say that the Mad King will start preying on her, that his obsession for the mother would not extend to the daughter. Aerys is known for being very lustful. He cheated on his wife Rhaela a lot, and considering the experiences Joanna's had and how Tywin felt about it, I can see this being a valid reason that gets brought up and possibly deters him from a Targaryen match, especially if his wife is still alive, in his ear, and he's already been rejected. So, that being said, Cersei is set up to marry Oberyn Martell. What happens in this timeline as a result? Cersei would end up going back to Dorne with Oberyn and Elia, something that she would not be happy with. Cersei had a fascination with Prince Rhaegar when she was younger, an obsession that continued well into her adulthood too. So to not only be rejected as his bride, but then to be sent off to live in sandy Dorne, it would seem like a nightmare to her. In a way, she's kind of like her daughter Marcella, who was also sent off to Dorne in canon. Though she wouldn't like Dorne and try to find everything wrong with this place, in my honest opinion, this would probably be the best place for her. It's not like Dorne and Sunspear would be much of a step down from Casterly Rock. It would still be a very lavish place to live, and not only that, the Dornish culture would be more inclusive for someone like Cersei. Cersei has a lot of conflict with her gender. She wishes that she was born a man and thinks it's not fair that Jaime got to grow up and learn about swords and leading men while she was stuck wearing dresses and learning how to smile. She laments her place in society at times, and in some instances in the books, she also just seems to hate other women in general. Dorne could change that. It would open a lot of doors and opportunities for her, and since she's so young, she has time to get accustomed to this, if she's willing, of course. She'll be a fish out of water at first, probably throwing fits here and there, saying it's not fair, she wanted to marry Rhaegar, and she'd hate being away from Jaime. But eventually, things will calm down and Cersei may think this is actually not that bad. Not to say that she's magically going to be happy about marrying Oberyn in the future or just accepting her role, and that Dorne is her new home. I mean, this is Cersei we're talking about. But as she grows in Dorne, she'll realize things aren't the same here. In Dorne, women can be more. They're equal to men. They can hold positions of power. They can rule other people. They can even learn how to fight. A lot of restrictions that Westeros places on their women do not exist here. So Cersei can be somewhat liberated and pursue what she feels she was denied on account of her gender. I definitely see Cersei wanting to train to be some kind of warrior at some point, kind of like the Sand Snakes, Oberyn's daughters. But in the books, not all of them are warriors, they each do different things, whether it's fighting or making poison or other stuff. Regardless though, I don't see this being an issue. The Martells will be very accommodating of Cersei's wants, since not only is her mother friends with theirs, she's also going to be their sister soon enough. Oberyn would probably take on her training personally, since they're getting married. He could do this as a bonding exercise, since she doesn't like him very much. I like the idea of Cersei using daggers or short swords when it comes to her fighting style. It speaks to her conniving nature, in my opinion. Though with all the advantages this match could pose for Cersei, personally, I do see there being some issues with this marriage once she gets older. Oberyn is said to have more bastards than Robert in the books, and while I'm sure he would be very respectful of Cersei, the Dornish do encourage pursuing passions, and Cersei hated Robert's infidelity. So that could pose a problem if we want this to be a happy couple. Now, you could argue that Cersei had lovers as well in canon outside of Jaime, so would it really be that much of an issue? I think it would be, because those lovers are less out of lust and passion, and more so out of narcissism. Like she only sleeps with Lancel because he looks like Jaime. And Jaime is her identical twin, so in a way you can say that sleeping with him is like sleeping with herself. And then there's a woman named Taena Merryweather in the books who she also sleeps with, but that's more so because she wants to feel like Robert, her husband, who she killed. It's weird, but I digress. I don't really see this being a happy marriage on her end if Oberyn still pursues extramarital activities. But moving on. With Cersei in the bowels of Dorne, what else happens in this story? Well, Tyrion will still be born just a bit later because of my changes, and Joanna still dies. Cersei makes a trip back home with Oberyn for her mother's funeral, and then sees her new baby brother. Tywin sees Cersei carrying around daggers now and thinks it's ridiculous that his daughter is trying to be a warrior, but he can't exactly do anything to stop her now that she's with Dorne and the Martells. In canon, when Tyrion was born and Cersei showed him to Oberyn, she pinched his privates to the point where Oberyn thought that they were gonna come off until Jaime stopped her. I see the same thing happening here too. Cersei loathes Tyrion so much for killing her mom, she takes it out on him. But I would say in this timeline, Cersei goes farther than that and actually tries to kill young Tyrion when she sees him. She goes for one of her daggers, saying that the monster killed her mother, but she's stopped by Oberyn before anything can happen. I don't see this being very far-fetched since in the books, at about 10 years old, Cersei actually killed one of her friends by pushing her down a well. They went to see this woman called Maggie the Frog for a prophecy, and she gave out more than one for Cersei and one for her friend. She told Cersei's friend, Melara, that her death was there with her. She asked if she could smell her breath because she was very close. It's pretty clear what happened, that Cersei killed her. So a young aggressive Cersei who was originally willing to harm an infant and kill her own friend, now having access to weapons, I could see her trying it as vengeance for her mother. Cersei is cruel, that's just who she is. Though nothing comes of it, but it does put a sour taste in the mouth of the Martells as she tried to kill a child, who also happens to be her baby brother. And it would only get worse between Cersei and the Martells years later when Elia marries Rhaegar. I still see that being a plot point that happens here. I don't think Cersei marrying Oberyn changes that at all. Cersei would hate that Elia was chosen for Rhaegar over her. She was told as a child that she would be queen one day. And now not only having been refused for Rhaegar, but to have her sister-in-law be chosen to be a princess and later queen of the Seven Kingdoms would make her absolutely furious, as if Elia stole something from her. So now things are tense with her new family. But it's not like she can really do anything about it. I doubt she tried to kill Elia, not that it's not within her character to do something like that, it just wouldn't change anything in her story. She'll still be stuck with Oberyn, and even if Rhaegar is single, she won't be able to marry him. Speaking of other things that don't change, Jaime will still be named to the Kingsguard in this timeline. Some people may question that because in the books, it seems like Cersei had something to do with him joining in the first place. Cersei did actually convince Jaime to become a member of the Kingsguard. She told Jaime that Tywin wanted to marry him off to Lysa Tully in the books, and in order to keep him unmarried and close by, she seduced him and compelled him to take up the White Cloak, even saying that she would help him get one. But if Cersei isn't around, this most likely won't happen. She won't tell him about his impending marriage to Lysa. She can't seduce him and make him want a White Cloak if she's down in Dorne. And if she's in Dorne and not court like she was in canon, she can't help him get the White Cloak to begin with. Now, I'm gonna be honest here. There are theories, but I don't think Cersei really did anything important to get Jaime a White Cloak. Maybe she could have brought the idea up to Aerys and influenced him somehow, but I prefer the idea that Cersei just overestimated herself like she often does, and Aerys named Jaime to the Kingsguard just to be petty and take a hostage against Tywin. She had no real influence on the decision, and that is where I'm going with this if today. The rebellion will also still happen in this timeline. Rhaegar will take Lyanna, Rickard and Brandon will try to get her back just to be killed by the Mad King. Ned, Robert and Jon Arryn will rise in rebellion, and the conflict starts, but it does beg a question. With Cersei married to Oberyn now, what side would the Lannisters be on in this conflict? In canon, the Lannisters were pretty much neutral up until the very end when rebel victory was certain. And Dorne supported the crown since Elia was a queen to be, and because she was being held hostage in the Red Keep by Aerys Targaryen. Would Tywin really go as far as to sack King's Landing and kill Elia and her children when this would guarantee the hate of the Martells who have his daughter? In my opinion, this marriage pact with Dorne and the possible repercussions that could befall Cersei would compel him to support the Loyalists. And not just that, the Martells have a connection to the crown through Rhaegar and Elia's marriage, and the Lannisters have a connection to them through Cersei's marriage to Oberyn. Tywin has always been an opportunist, so another thing that compels him to help is the idea that if he helps Rhaegar win his father's war, he can take advantage of that familial connection somehow, maybe to get Jaime off the Kingsguard and have his heir back. I also think he'll help them because in this timeline, he doesn't really have anything to offer Robert. With Cersei married off, he can't offer her up as queen later on. So he works with what he has, and the Lannisters join the fight and do it much earlier in this timeline. So the Crown has more support against the rebels. And I actually want to say because they have the Lannisters helping them out, while it would be a bigger, bloodier conflict, the Crown would actually win this time. Thanks to the addition of Tywin and his armies, they take out Robert, maybe during the Battle of the Bells or during a much bigger Battle of the Trident. With Robert dead, this would basically spell the end for the rebellion. While there are other leaders, Robert was pretty much the face of the whole thing, if we're being honest. So while other people would put up a fight, it wouldn't be a long one. If his brother's dead, I don't think that Stannis will continue to fight. Back in those days, Stannis himself says that choosing between his family and his duty to King Aerys was the hardest decision he ever made. He chose Robert in the end, but doesn't change the fact that he had to choose to begin with. I don't see Stannis taking up Robert's place as leader once he died. He has no obligation to the conflict anymore. Rickard and Brandon Stark weren't his parents or siblings. Lyanna wasn't his sister or his fiancée. You could argue that he's obligated to avenge his brother, but that would pretty much be impossible for him. At the time that this was all going down, he was under siege at Storm's End, courtesy of the Tyrells, and its people were starving. There isn't much I think he could do in this instance, so with that being said, I do think Stannis would bow out. I also think that Ned gets injured in the conflict and gets captured by the Loyalist army, like Barristan Selmy did. He was also injured at the Battle of the Trident and taken prisoner. This enables him to get an audience with Prince Rhaegar, since he's still alive now that Robert is dead, and he wants to talk to Ned because he's the brother of the woman he stole away. I think Rhaegar would tell Ned the truth here. At least the show version of the truth, since we don't know what really happened in the books yet. In the show, Rhaegar and Lyanna were actually in love, and they got married in secret. He'd tell Ned this, but I'm pretty sure he wouldn't believe it at first. But with the rebels being on the back foot with Robert dead, Ned captured, and Jon Arryn being the only real leader they have left, Rhaegar will have time to take him to the Tower of Joy to see Lyanna for himself. She and Rhaegar will regale him of their secret marriage and how she wasn't actually kidnapped. Ned will be furious because this means this war got started for nothing. Their father and brother tried saving her when she didn't need saving. Robert died trying to get her back. He would be livid, but at this point, he would also recognize that there is no point in continuing this fight. With Robert dead and Stannis folding, they have no one to rally around. Robert was going to take the throne, but with him gone and Stannis not fighting, that claim is pretty much voided. And with Ned knowing his sister isn't being held hostage, he has no stake in this fight outside of getting justice for his family, which Rhaegar will promise him. In the books, Rhaegar did seem to be planning a coup against Aerys before he died because he was crazy. Ned would likely be hesitant on this, but I think Lyanna will help convince Ned to throw his lot in with Rhaegar here, and to trust him. It's not like he can do much in this position anyway. So with the promise of Ned's support, and Rhaegar's promise for justice for the Starks, Ned sends a letter to Jon Arryn to stand down and stop the fighting. Probably telling him the truth about what happened as well, and Rhaegar's plan. Later, Rhaegar overthrows his father, King Aerys, with some help from others, and the conflict will end. He apologizes for his actions, frees Ned, most likely pardons everyone who rose against the crown, and that's the end of the conflict. Then Jon will be born, but under a new name since he was named after Jon Arryn in canon, and I doubt his name will be Aegon because Rhaegar already has a son named Aegon who is still alive since the Lannisters never sacked the city. And now, instead of being raised as a bastard, he'll be raised as a prince alongside his siblings. But not as the heir since his big brother Aegon is still alive here. Lyanna will still die in childbirth though, I don't see that part of the story changing. I also think that for his help in the war, Tywin will request that Jaime be released from the Kingsguard. Rhaegar, knowing that this was a petty move made by Aerys, would agree. So Tywin gets his heir back. So, because Cersei married Oberyn, in my interpretation of events, Tywin supports the crown, Elia and her children live, Rhaegar takes over, Jon is now a prince, and we're looking at an entirely different, possibly more peaceful timeline. And that's where I'm going to end things today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, tell me what changes you would have made down below, and I will see you all next time.